Nice try, my man.
Could these be the men who killed him?
Give me your wallet and car case, and we'll call it even.
Держи его! Пока.
The movie Acts of Vengeance begins by introducing Frank Valera, a quiet man who enters a restaurant, where he maintains his silence even when offered a menu and served coffee. However, despite his quiet demeanor, Frank possesses an extraordinary ability to hear even the faintest whispers from a distance. This keen hearing leads him to overhear voices coming from the restaurant's kitchen. Intrigued, Frank enters the kitchen, locks the door behind him, and swiftly attacks a chef. The scene then shifts to the past, where Frank is shown working in his office. A once successful and ambitious lawyer, Frank lives in a mansion with his wife, Sue Valera, and daughter, Olivia Valera. However, his demanding career leaves him with little time for his family. One day, Olivia calls Frank, reminding him of his promise to attend her school performance. Unfortunately, Frank is unable to make it due to work commitments, and when Olivia looks for him in the audience, she is only able to spot her mother. Disappointed, Olivia watches the show without her father. Despite his best efforts to reach the venue on time, Frank arrives after the performance has concluded. He returns home to find that Sue and Olivia have not yet come back. His anxiety grows as the time passes, and his worst fears are realized when the police arrive at his door with tragic news. Sue and Olivia have been murdered. The authorities take him to a train yard, where their bodies are dumped, and Frank is unable to contain his grief. At the funeral, his father-in-law, Chuck, makes his disdain for Frank known, blaming him for his wife and daughter's deaths due to his greed and career choices as a lawyer. Chuck ends the conversation, refusing to hear any more from Frank. Overcome by guilt, Frank isolates himself in Olivia's room, reading her notes in an attempt to cope with the loss. One day, he visits the police station to check on the progress of the investigation. Detective Lustiger reveals that they found golden threads at the crime scene, but the evidence is insufficient to make an arrest. Frustrated with the slow pace of the investigation, Frank turns to alcohol. One night, in a drunken stupor, he finds himself in a bar and ends up provoking a fight with a large group of men. The next day, he takes part in underground fighting as a way to channel his anger and frustration, despite having no martial arts experience. He loses repeatedly, coming home battered and bruised, until one day, he is severely injured in a fight. A police officer, Hank Strode, who had previously been involved in the investigation, intervenes and saves Frank. During a conversation at a cafe, Strode reveals that he too participates in the illegal fights as a way to relieve stress, but he is surprised to see Frank there. Strode also informs Frank that the investigation is on hold, which only fuels Frank's anger and despair. Later, as Frank walks home one night, a young girl approaches him, offering herself to him. When he refuses, a man arrives to pick her up, and Frank intervenes to stop the man from exploiting the girl. The man responds by violently attacking Frank, but when the girl stabs Frank in the leg, he manages to overpower the man, only to be left wounded. Using a book to stem the bleeding, Frank escapes into the night, hiding from the police. While hiding, he reads a book about Marcus Aurelius' meditations, and one passage about punishing those who confess a crime inspires Frank to take action. Motivated by this newfound resolve, he begins training in various martial arts, starting with karate and boxing. Despite early setbacks, Frank improves his skills and becomes stronger until he is able to defeat his karate instructor in a sparring match. He also trains in silence, vowing not to speak until he has avenged the deaths of Sue and Olivia. His hearing also becomes increasingly acute, allowing him to hear even the smallest sounds. The following day, Frank visits the location where Sue and Olivia's bodies were discarded, only to discover a shipping container resembling a house. He finds no further clues, but while returning to his car, he encounters 4 men trying to steal it. When they threaten him, Frank remains silent, refusing to speak. One of the men orders his dog to attack Frank, but the dog hesitates and eventually runs away after Frank glares at it. A fight ensues, and Frank manages to defeat the four men. He questions one of them, but the thug has no information about the murders, so Frank lets him go. Just as Frank is about to get into his car, the thug shoots him. Though wounded, Frank defeats the thug before collapsing. The dog that had earlier run away returns and approaches Frank, who, now unconscious, is found by the dog and taken to the home of a nurse named Alma. Alma, who treated Frank's injuries, informs him that she found him at the train yard. Frank does not respond, and he leaves her house without a word. However, the dog continues to follow him, and Frank eventually brings it home with him. As time passes, Frank continues gathering evidence about Sue and Olivia's deaths. One afternoon, Alma returns Frank's wallet, and upon entering his home, she discovers why Frank refuses to speak. Frank shows her the photograph of Sue and Olivia, as well as the evidence he has accumulated. With Alma's help, Frank is able to trace a lead to a cook named Mr. Shivers, who works at a local restaurant. Frank visits the restaurant, where he confronts Mr. Shivers, beating him until he confesses to witnessing the murder. Although Shivers cannot identify the killer, he reveals that the culprit wore a police uniform and drove away in a car. He also admits to stealing money from Sue's wallet before discarding it. Determined to verify Shivers' story, Frank returns to the crime scene with his dog, which helps him find Sue's purse in a manhole. Frank then sneaks into the police station and accesses Detective Lustiger's computer to find the names of the officers on duty when Sue and Olivia were killed. To his shock, he discovers that Hank Strode was one of them. Frank spends the next 7 days shadowing Strode, trying to understand his motives. He eventually sneaks into Strode's house, where he finds a photo of Strode with his daughter and a police uniform with a loose golden thread reminiscent of the evidence Lustiger had found. Frank continues searching and discovers a secret compartment containing a backpack full of magazines that report on Frank's past career as a lawyer, as well as an article about how he helped free the man responsible for the death of Strode's daughter. Later, Frank arranges to meet Strode at Kingsman Station. When Strode arrives, Frank attacks him, and the two engage in a fierce battle. Although they are evenly matched, Frank ultimately decides to spare Strode's life, overcoming his desire for revenge. The film ends with Frank attending Strode's trial, where Strode is convicted of his crimes. Frank, accompanied by Alma, then visits the graves of Sue and Olivia. In a final moment of closure, Frank speaks for the first